stuff. This meeting is being recorded, everyone. Oh, I don't know if everyone has to press continue. Okay, so I'm gonna play the intro slide. So we'll do that for a few minutes before we get started. So I'm gonna share my screen. All right, hi, good afternoon on this beautiful day. We're all here to discuss Montgomery County's building energy performance standards and through a discussion of their proposed legislation. This course that you're all here for today does receive credits. You'll get that credit automatically, but if you want a certificate, contact Pam or Sue. I'll just briefly go through this. This session is an opportunity for the architecture community to learn about what Montgomery County is proposing in terms of legislation on building energy performance. Often, Lindsay, is it actually referred to as BEPS?
Yes.
And this is also importantly an opportunity for us to provide feedback. So I think this is a really, that makes this kind of unique and special. And this is part of Montgomery County's overall climate action plan, which some people within this community have been involved in helping to develop. I am going to read through these learning objectives because I think that they're important. Architect attendees will learn the details of county officials' plans for legislation establishing BEPS, Building Energy Performance Standards, and be able to provide technical assistance. So again, this is kind of a give and take process. The county intends to develop BEPS that align with goals for climate and racial social equity, balance flexibility with immediate action, provide certainty and transparency for building owners and tenants, and spur job and economic growth. Attendees will evaluate how well the county's legislative proposals align with these goals. We'll also be able to provide input to the county officials on potential compliance issues. This is particularly important to achieve energy usage and carbon footprint goals, as non-compliance would obviously threaten achievement of these goals. The attendees will, through this process, be developing a formal channel as citizen advocates and stakeholders with county officials. The ability to establish and deepen contacts with top county officials is essential to promoting sustainable design throughout the county, which is the largest jurisdiction in AIA Potomac Valley's territory. It has over 1 million residents and a thriving building industry. Sustainable design is essential to promoting health and welfare. And I'll also say that this is a great opportunity for the rest of the counties for us to develop ideas and to bring forward to the rest of the counties under the AIA-PV jurisdiction. So that's it for these intro slides. I now just want to introduce Lindsay Shaw from Montgomery County, who's going to take it from here and get us acquainted.
Great, thank you so much, Deborah. Can everyone see my screen? Quick thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for hosting us today. My name is Lindsay Shaw. I am the Energy and Sustainability Manager for the Department of Environmental Protection, and with me today is Emily Curley. She's the Commercial Energy Program Manager with Montgomery County. She manages the benchmarking law. We'll get into that in a minute. That's a key component of the Building Energy Performance Standard. So she'll be monitoring the chat for any questions that come in, or correct me if I omit something that I should be saying. So we've been doing this presentation for a number of different groups, and we've been getting incredible feedback. We're looking forward to hearing from the architect community here and continuing the dialogue as this moves through council. So here today on May 27th of 2021, we're presenting on the Building Energy Performance Standards proposed legislation that's in front of the Montgomery County Council right now. But before we talk about BEPS, and I will abbreviate that to BEPS for the rest of this conversation, I just wanted to give a quick overview. We're not going to go through everything on this slide, but just show that this is one policy in a series of initiatives that the county has undertaken to address emissions in the built environment. So we set climate goals back in 2007, which was pretty nascent for climate action goals back then. But when that came out, we had some requirements as well as some incentives for the green building community. I'm sure that you all are familiar with the green building tax credit for building to lead. As many of you may know, that is in the process of sunsetting to be replaced by a new and improved program, which I'm happy to come back and talk about with this group at another time. 2013 to 2014 was a big kind of boom of programs in Montgomery County. Our building energy benchmarking law was passed. We came out with commercial PACE financing. We established the first local level green bank in the country. So we had a number of things that were happening back in 2013, 14, 15. In 2017, we accelerated our climate goals that we originally established back in 2007 to say those goals are not going to get us where we need to be. We need to be thinking more aggressively about how to reduce carbon emissions in our built environment, in our transportation, in our communities. So this is a community-wide goal with the ultimate goal of eliminating GHG emissions by 2035. Pretty lofty ambition there. When that was established, we started working on some climate action planning work to update our 2009 climate protection plan. That is in the process of being finalized. You should see the updated climate action plan hitting the final version, hitting the streets in less than a month. We put a goal of spring 2021, and that is quickly coming to an end in mid-June. We're also moving forward with the 2018 International Green Construction Code. So this proposal, the IGCC, of course, addresses new construction, and BEPS addresses the existing built environment. So we think that we have a really good package moving forward to address emissions in the built environment. There's more to do related to building energy performance standard and using our building code cycles to actually get to net zero requirements for new buildings. But that is coming soon. But this is just we'll send out a copy of these slides after the presentation. You can take a closer look at this, but just to level set of where we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. So I mentioned the 2017 climate emergency declaration that our county council passed, which accelerated our climate goals. This is where we are so far. 2005 is our greenhouse gas emissions baseline. 2018, you can see we're making some steady progress. There's more work to do. As the renewable portfolio standard ramps up, the county got approval to do a CCE program to improve the emissions of the grid that's sourcing the energy to these buildings. We think that these goals are at least more achievable than they were earlier in the previous state legislative session. So again, this is where we need to go, where these stars are. Those are our targets. BEPS is one strategy to get us there. Looking specifically at buildings and climate, energy use in the built environment accounts for about half of the county's community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. So BEPS specifically focuses on this orange wedge down here, the commercial buildings at 26%. So it's a big policy. It doesn't address everything, but addressing emissions in the existing built environment is one of the trickiest sectors to tackle. Transportation, of course, is challenging because people have preferences on how they want to get to places, but buildings stay in the ground, and depending on how they use energy, it is, and unless those buildings are doing upgrades where they need to interact with permitting services, there's no reason for those buildings to interact with the county in any other way. So this gets the commercial building sector coming to the county to say, let's figure out a way to make your building more efficient. So the concept of BEPS is built on the county's building energy benchmarking law. This was passed back in May 2014, which was great. Thank goodness we had this, because this is the foundation in which the BEPS policy implementation is built on. So the benchmarking law covers county and privately owned non-residential buildings that are 50,000 square feet and greater. There are some use types that are currently exempt. The data collection process is using the free online tool that EPA offers called Portfolio Manager. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that in some capacity. Data verification is required every 3 years. A registered architect is one of the recognized data verifying credentials that's allowed, since you all understand buildings quite well. We think that you have the credentials and the street cred to actually review the data that's in Portfolio Manager and make sure that it's being reported accurately to the county. That data needs to be reported every year by June 1st, coming up next week, next Tuesday. If anyone has questions about the benchmarking law, please reach out to Emily Curley. We'll have our contact info on these slides after. Reach out to Emily if you have any questions about that June 1st deadline, whether or not you have a building that needs to comply. If you have questions about the reporting process, please reach out to Emily. She is everything that you would ever need to know about the benchmarking law. She has it at her fingertips. So the benchmarking law results in building owners and managers having a better understanding of how energy use is consumed in the building, and gives them the tools they need to make improvements to their buildings. But unfortunately, benchmarking, although it is a great tool, we're seeing about a 2% reduction in buildings that are consistently benchmarking, but it's not enough to meet those climate goals that we saw on that previous slide. So Montgomery County has been exploring building energy performance standards. We started looking into this in mid-2019. We started to put some key stakeholders together. Some AIA Potomac Valley folks were involved in that effort, to say if Montgomery County is going to put a building energy performance standard law out there, what do we need to know? What's best practice? What are you seeing? If you're given these, couple options, which is the route you're going to choose? What metrics should we be choosing? What's the right interim checkpoint cycle to make sure that we're aligning with capital planning cycles that buildings have? So we have these policy recommendations. It's hyperlinked here. That report came out in September 2020. Would have come out a little bit earlier, but I had a baby in that time. So, that had to take some maternity time for that. But when we met with those stakeholders, the key guiding principle that they always rallied around was balancing flexibility for building owners with the immediate action required for the county's climate goals. So we think that the policy design that we've come up with, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, really does speak to that flexibility while also working towards improvement. So we think that there's a good amount of flexibility. We know that not all buildings are uniform. Everyone is unique, and they all have their own sets of challenges, whether it's tenant, structural, operational. We understand that there are challenges out there and not all buildings operate the same way. So when we looked at this legislation moving forward, we thought, wouldn't it be great if we just modified the existing benchmarking law to include a performance requirement? And we figured we had the book open, we might as well make some improvements as well. We're going to talk about those improvements in a couple slides. But what this also allows is we made some improvements. We've been working on the benchmarking law for a couple of years. There are some areas that needed improvement, but the cities of Gaithersburg and Rockville already went through the legislative process to opt into the benchmarking law. We didn't want them to have to go through a whole new legislative opt-in process with a new piece of legislation. So they still have the choice of a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether or not they want to stay opted into the benchmarking law with this new performance requirement. But DEP is, of course, engaging with those jurisdictions, the smaller local jurisdictions within the county, to make sure that they do still want to opt in, that they see benefit of it, and more importantly, that the county does the work for them, because that's the agreement. We'll have the law apply and we'll do the work for you, but we want it to apply to your jurisdiction, because boy, it just makes life easier. It's the confusion of what's included and what's not is just much easier when the local jurisdictions are opted in. So the law that is in front of the county council now establishes BEPS in Montgomery County. It signals to the market that we want to proceed in this direction. This is how we want to address climate emissions in the built environment. Gets us that first county status. We would be the first county in the nation to pass a building energy performance standard. But we will come back similar to what other jurisdictions have done. We establish BEPS, we get the guideposts out there, and then we come back with regulation for technical details. This process, as well as the regulatory process later with those technical details, are all open, transparent processes that this group and others will be involved in, I hope, moving forward. So what's currently covered and what are we changing? When we had that book open, we did have a request from a council member to say, can't we have the square footage threshold go down a little bit lower so we include more buildings? Right now, the current benchmarking law covers buildings 50,000 square feet and greater. We're dropping that square footage threshold down to 25,000 square feet. If folks in this group are familiar with Washington, D.C., they are going down to 10,000 square feet. We don't have the staff to go down to 10,000 square feet. We did some negotiating. We looked at DC's data about what type of energy are we going to tap into going down to 10,000 square feet. That we found that 25,000 square feet was the sweet spot. 50,000 is actually the sweet spot. But if we wanted to add in more buildings, going down to this 25,000 square foot threshold is what other jurisdictions have looked at. And DC had some data to help back up that number. There are going to be, we've modified some of the waiver requirements and exemption requirements. So some buildings that previously didn't have to comply may need to comply now. So it'll be good to check in with DEP to make sure that if your building didn't have to comply before, it might now. So we have another slide coming up to talk about that. But the biggest change is that we're adding in multifamily properties. So multifamily properties, 50,000 square feet will be, 25,000 square feet and greater will be phased in, similar to our first round of the benchmarking law with non-residential commercial buildings. We phase them in over time, with the larger properties benchmarking first, because many of them already are, and the smaller properties to follow. So this will add in, we'll talk about the impact in a minute. So a couple other minor changes to the benchmarking law. We've clarified what a building is. And if anyone is familiar with the previous benchmarking law, the one that's currently on the books, our definition of a covered building was confusing. And we know that. It was the only time in the county code that the buildings or group of buildings that shared a tax parcel was considered a covered building. Very confusing, especially for folks that had, 4 buildings on a tax parcel, and they'd say, well, I don't know what, this one's 50,000, but none of the rest are. Turns out all of them had to comply. So that nuance is now gone. So it's single structure. And unless they happen to share energy systems or somehow share a meter in some way, they would be considered one covered building. So there's some nuance there. Again, reach out to DEP if you have specific examples of which buildings would be covered and which ones wouldn't. We've reduced the property types that are eligible for exemptions. And we've had some feedback from a number of folks that said, boy, you're really striking a lot of buildings with the way that exemptions are processed. The biggest change is this final bullet here is we've increased the square footage threshold from 10% to 50%. So if your building is actually more than half being used in an exempt use type, you would be able to be exempt. But we have some buildings that say, I'm 17% manufacturing and industrial, so I don't have to comply with the benchmarking law. Yeah, but the remainder of your building is office. So you really should be complying with the law. And we've modified the types that can do this. So we did get some pushback from folks saying, all other benchmarking jurisdictions require warehousing and self-storage to report. Why don't you? So we did modify that. We do have a fair amount of warehousing and self-storage in Montgomery County. It's the industrial and process loads that we want to make sure are excluded. Those are not things that are going to be modified or by peer pressure from a benchmarking law. So the proposed exempt types address that here. We've also tightened the waiver criteria to align with DC's criteria, just for building owners that have buildings in both jurisdictions, to make it a little bit easier so that the criteria are the same. So what impact does that have? Currently, the benchmarking law covers about 40% of the commercial floor area. These changes would more than double that to make sure that we are reaching building owners there. You can't manage what you don't measure. And so especially for this big multifamily stack right here, they're now going to be able to benchmark their data and understand the trends of energy being used in their buildings and what programs are available for them to reduce their energy use. So getting into BEPS, there are a number of jurisdictions that have already passed building energy performance standard policies: Washington, D.C., New York City, Washington State, and St. Louis. We have the most contact with Washington, D.C., of course, because they're right across the border to the south of us. And we do a lot of lessons learned and info sharing since, of course, some of our building owners have buildings in both spaces. St. Louis has also been really helpful with information sharing and best practice sharing. New York City has a CO2 emissions metric, a little bit different than ours. Ours is a site EUI metric. So we don't have as much contact with them, but of course they they were one of the first to come out of the gate with a building performance policy. So we, of course, look to see their lessons learned so we don't repeat mistakes, of course. So we are seeing that jurisdictions across the country are adopting BEPS legislation, or they're exploring BEPS legislation. But on this slide, you can see that there is not one size fits all, and there's not one silver bullet to address all of the issues of the existing built environment. We're all kind of playing with different strategies and metrics to see what is going to work the best. We were working with the Institute for Market Transformation under the City Energy Project. We were in the final cohort of that effort with NRDC. So with that, IMT is now using the model that was developed in Montgomery County to talk to other jurisdictions to say, this is the best model that we've seen so far. So we are really proud of that. And we're hoping to see more of this uptake in the future across the country. So this is what that looks like. This is what we call the trajectory model. So this is what we developed with Montgomery County stakeholders and IMT. What this does is it sets a long-term performance standard that's based on our climate emergency goals that we have with the immediate for that need for immediate action, with the building owner's need for long-term certainty and flexibility with how they manage their buildings. This long-term standard also gives the county time to educate and engage the impacted community. So we have more time, and we are also using that phased approach as well, which you'll see on a later slide of how this all comes together. We're giving building owners some time to understand what this means and what it means for their building, and then it gives us time to reach out to all of those folks that will be impacted by this. So we've selected a site EUI, or energy use intensity, as our metric. That's energy use on site that's in the building owner's direct control. It's not reliant on emissions that might be grid impacted with how clean the electricity grid is. So we're taking that off the table in terms, so we're not using source EUI, we're not using a GHG metric because building owners in our stakeholder group said, I can control the site EUI and I can communicate that to my facility managers. So this is a number that I can get my hands around. It's not some far off number like a GHG metric calculation. It's not Energy Star that's going to change every couple of years when the CBEX survey updates. It's something that I can get my hands around. But the county executive also wants to use this policy to incentivize on-site solar installations. So our metric actually will end up being a net normalized site EUI. So we're still trying to figure that out. There might be some questions about that. We're getting a state consultant on board to help us kind of think through the policy implications of different rec retention scenarios, different project setups. You know, there's I'm sure you all know this. There's a lot of variety in the renewable energy world, and we want to make sure that we don't have anything in our blind spots and that we're looking at all of the policy options on the table. While each property use grouping would have the same final standard, everyone gets their own custom baseline based on historical average energy use. The data is reported in Portfolio Manager, same as you do for the benchmarking law every year. We'll give building owners an update on how they're doing to that final target to say, hey, you're on track, you're doing all right. Or you might need to look at some of these programs to make sure that you hit your next interim target. Those interim targets are every 4 years, just to make sure, like, hey, you're on track to meet your final target. We think that you're doing great, or wow, you are totally shooting for the moon up there. It's not going to happen. We want to make sure that you get back on track. So for those properties, we have something in our law called a building performance improvement plan. And so what that does is, in this example, these are all example numbers. We don't have a final standard set for any property type yet. We're still working on the research for that. So these are all sample numbers on this slide. No one freak out. Say that your building starts off at 100. Your first interim target's an 83, but you're at a 90. You're not meeting your target, but you're making some progress. Maybe you have a tenant move out coming up. Maybe there's some recapitalization that you're planning on doing in your building. There's something in the future by the next interim target or by the final target that would say, I'm not meeting my target now, but I'm going to, and this is how. Here are the ECMs I'm going to do. Here's the timeline in which I'm going to do it. Here's my expected savings. I'm going to meet that final target based on everything in my building performance improvement plan. Dear County, would you please accept that? We'll review it in conjunction with the building advisory board, which we're going to talk about next, and say, yes, you are in compliance. We think that you are on the right track to reducing your emissions and meeting your final standard. So keep on going, work on your BPIP actions, and we'll check in the next interim standard to make sure that you're going where you say you're going. And in this example, yes, they are. They're at a 60 as opposed to a 67. So they're below their target. They're doing okay. They're on track to meet their final target. The concept of a building performance improvement plan is right now a concept. That is one of the elements in that technical details and regulation that will be worked out later. What elements are in a BPIP? We kind of have some general things in the legislation of what would be included. We have a concept, but the actual form, the required documentation, all of that will be worked out in regulation, which would be due to council June 1st of next year. So I'd mentioned a building advisory board. This advisory board would be providing recommendations to the county on the building BEPS implementation. The county ends up retaining that decision-making authority. This is modeled off of the boards, committees, and commissions, if any of you folks are on those for the county. So you would have 2 3-year terms in a staggered capacity, and there's a number of different industry areas that are covered under that should be part of the board makeup. County leadership will obviously be there as non-voting members, but building owners, utilities, the energy services, finance, nonprofits, and industry representatives. If anyone on this call is interested in joining that advisory board, send us an email and let us know your interest, and we'll keep you on a list. So when we are opening that up for application, that we can send that to you and remind you of your interest. So this advisory board would be responsible with reviewing those building performance improvement plans we just talked about, and handling unique situations like campuses, changes in property use type, changes in ownership, and what to do about when those changes happen. What happens to the final target? What happens to the baseline? What happens if you do something that's completely innovative in your building that wasn't considered at the time of BEPS being passed? This building advisory board would be able to comment on that and give the building owner direction on how to move forward and stay in compliance. So once the legislation is passed, we will work on putting this board together, as they will be giving recommendations and input on the final target setting and the regulations that are sent over to council in June of 2022. So in the current legislation, we do have a note for additional criteria to modify BEPS compliance for under-resourced sectors. And that right now is being defined as affordable housing, nonprofits, small businesses who happen to own buildings that would be required to comply. DEP would be able to grant extensions or adjustments to BEPS. And you'll notice it doesn't say exemptions. We felt that it was extremely important not to exclude those under-resourced sectors from the building BEPS. I keep trying to define it and I'm not going to. We thought it was important not to exclude them from the energy savings and the indoor air quality benefits and all the good things that come with BEPS compliance. But that also means that the county needs to put resources together, technical and financial assistance for those under-resourced sectors to help them with compliance. And within other jurisdictions, we found that they sometimes just want more time. And we think that that's a reasonable thing to grant. Some of them might say, I'm in Tacoma Park and I have rent stabilization, therefore I'm not getting the same income as a market rate unit owner. So what am I going to do here? That might be an area where the building advisory board has, can help us with some guidance around, unique situations like that, where we have one jurisdiction in the entire county, actually in the entire state of Maryland, that has rent stabilization. No one else does. So we are looking at other assistance tools for those under-resourced sectors. We're talking to the Building Innovation Hub that is based in DC. They've always wanted to be a regional entity, and we want to make sure that their first regional expansion is up to Montgomery County. But we know that just technical assistance and connecting with different organizations, some building owners need a little bit more handholding than that, and we're thinking through what that might look like. And if this group has suggestions or opinions on that, we'd love to hear them. So this is, of course, the we're talking about the legislation passing, but as part of that, there's more work to be done and there's more details that need to be worked out through regulation. These are a few of the things that are listed here. Of course, we talked about adjustments or assistance for those under-resourced sectors, the more details around BPIPs, what the format for BPIPs are going to be. The on-site solar credit is something that we've said in kind of a loose way because we don't really know what it's going to look like yet. So we'll figure that out by the time we have to put regulation over to council. And the big key piece right now that is not part of the BEPS legislation is the actual numerical targets of the site EUI final performance standard for each property type. So that is going to be coming through regulation. We're currently working with Stephen Winter Associates to set those targets and make sure that they are technically feasible, but are still keeping our climate goals in mind. So in the current legislation, those regulations need to be issued no later than June 1st of 2022. I'm 75% certain that date will be moved back, but keep your fingers crossed. We don't want it to be moved back. So I said this all comes together in our BEPS timeline here. The key takeaway is that we have some new buildings that will need to benchmark, and it's going to be hard to give them a BEPS target if they don't know what their performance is. So we're giving those newly benchmarked buildings 3 years to benchmark their buildings to develop a baseline, which takes an average of the 2 highest years of those 3 years. So we think that that overcomes some of the concerns that we have with COVID specific changes where multifamily has high occupancy, or office buildings have an abnormally low occupancy because of COVID. We think that doing a historical averaged baseline over a number of years helps overcome that challenge. So these all the way at the bottom, these bubbles at the bottom, the groups 1 and 2 are currently benchmarking under the benchmarking law. So those will be first into the building energy performance standards cycle, followed by groups 3 and 4, and then group 5. So of course, these are phased in, helps the county educate those building owners in a phased way, but it also helps building owners just get up to speed about what all this means. So the group 3, which is the groups 3 and 4, I think Emily will correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, groups 3 and 4 have the same cycle. So they would start benchmarking their calendar year 2021 data, which you can get historical aggregated data from the utility companies 24 months prior. So we think that even buildings that need to benchmark their 2021 data will be able to access that information from the utilities. But again, if the legislation is delayed, then we believe that those timelines will get pushed back a little bit too. This is just a summary slide that is helpful to refer back to, or if you're talking to clients, you can pop this slide into your presentations to say, here's the kind of stuff that you're looking at in Montgomery County to gear up for. So that's in there for reference later on. But let's talk about what's coming up next. So right now, the county executive submitted the legislation over to council on April 1st. Couldn't have been a worse time. They were smack in the middle of the FY22 budget cycle, which was just finalized today. Pretty exciting. We have our final budget for the next fiscal year. So they had formal introduction of the legislation on May 4th. The public hearing is planned for summer 2021. And if folks have heard this presentation before, you may have noticed that before it was supposed to be June 15th. We were supposed to have our public hearing on June 15th, but it did get rescheduled. So stay tuned for when that public hearing is going to happen. But after the public hearing, that legislation will be referred to a committee, likely the Transportation and Environment Committee for the County Council. They'll have likely multiple work sessions on this topic before it's transmitted back to the full council for final votes. So we are just at the very beginning of a legislative process. So we're hoping that this is a continued conversation with this group moving forward. Because we're doing a lot of work while the legislative process is happening, we're still gearing up as if this is moving forward. We're going to keep doing outreach to stakeholders. So if there are other groups that you're a part of that would find this presentation to be valuable, please reach out to us. We're happy to set up some time that makes sense for different groups. We're also developing training materials. We have a website that Emily will likely throw into the chat if she hasn't already, as well as a one-pager that we need to make sure is up there. We're still working on that data analysis with Stephen Winter Associates to inform the regulations and the actual standards per property type. We'll, of course, once the legislation is passed, we'll work on putting the advisory board together and figuring out, of course, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. Like people are like, well, I want to know what all the technical resources are going to be. And you kind of can't do that until the legislation's passed, because we don't know if council's going to change the things that are in the original legislation. So you don't want to have something fully baked and then have them change it for it to be outdated. So little chicken and egg issue, but we think that we have a good handle on what we need to provide for building owners to come into compliance and understand this law. It also will require additional staff from DEP. If anyone's looked at the legislative packet, we are requesting a number of new positions to assist in this effort. And hopefully those new positions will begin working on regulations to be transmitted to council by June 1st of 2022. So when we give this presentation, we get a lot of questions about, okay, well, now what? What can I do? The first thing that we would respectfully ask of this group is if there's any interest in writing a letter of support or giving testimony to the county council during the public hearing that was happening June 15th, but is now pushed back to sometime this summer. Start talking about BEPS with other organizations, and start normalizing that this is something that's going to happen in Montgomery County, fingers crossed, and that will hopefully be the first county to have this policy in place, which we're very excited about, and tie it back to our climate action plan, which will be released in the coming weeks. So we also hope that you'll stay engaged while we are putting regulations together. This is, of course, a very open and transparent process. We're not trying to put these things together in a black box and then put them out to the world as final. There's, of course, public comment periods, but we're really big on getting stakeholder input early and often. So we definitely want to hear your voices while we're working on that. Again, if anyone on this call is interested in joining the advisory board, please let us know. And then if you are in touch with building owners or you have buildings of your own, start looking at the efficiency opportunities that are out there. I'm sure that I don't need to tell this group that there's quote unquote free money to be had through the utility companies and the Empower Maryland incentive programs. There are building tune-up, custom and prescriptive rebates that are available. And one of the big ones that they are always advocating for is the staff O&M training. So if you have staff, or if you want training yourselves, they'll pay up to 90% of the cost of that O&M training to better operate the building that those folks operate. There's also grants and other programs offered at the state level through the Maryland Energy Administration. And then the Montgomery County Green Bank has a variety of financing programs that are available. They recently took over program administration of our commercial PACE financing program, which we're super excited about. But then they have a number of offerings for commercial building owners to improve their buildings and get low interest financing for what they want to do. And with that, this is our contact info. Stan Edwards unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but Emily's here, I'm here. And then we keep this BEPS website pretty well updated. There's a nice big blue box at the top that has kind of the current status of things. But then we always encourage folks to sign up for our commercial energy newsletter. It comes out monthly. It lets you know about the benchmarking law deadlines, as well as other resources and movement on BEPS. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Deborah and Sue. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all of your faces and then see what I missed in the chat while I was presenting.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was incredibly informative. I think I'll open it up and just see, we still have a bit of time. So if there's any questions or comments or conversation that anyone wants to have, you can drop something in the chat. You can raise your hand.
Yeah, so I have a quick question. How is all this going to affect building codes and the use, I guess, thereof, and what we all need to review?
That's a good question. So we're doing building codes in tandem with BEPS, but they're not necessarily, I wouldn't say that the BEPS policy informs building code at this point. We do have I'm sure that you folks all have connected with Brian Bomer at the Department of Permitting Services, who's leading the Green Buildings Program and the International Green Construction Code effort. I know that there is a plan by the 2030 code cycle to have all building types be net zero. So I would say that if anything, a new building becomes an existing building about 12 months after it's built. So I would say that once you're done with building code, you would then go into the BEPS program to make sure that your building, even though if it was built very well, doesn't necessarily mean it's operating very well, which the codes can do some of, but not all of. Just we know that things can go off the rails fairly quickly with.
I'll throw this out there then. So I'm the commercial permitting manager for the city of Gaithersburg, and we do not follow Montgomery County building codes. We have our own standards and amendments as such. So as this process moves forward, I know you guys have included Gaithersburg, but it would be helpful if all, I guess, departments and stuff kind of get together to kind of work in tandem so that if Gaithersburg and Rockville and whomever still stay on board with this, which makes tons of sense, I'm not against it at all, that we're also on board with that too, so that our requirements are the same or at least close to Montgomery County's and everybody else's that's following this.
Boy, I embody the effort that you want to have happen. I think that code coordination is one of the key pieces of climate planning that is overlooked. And sounds like you're tired of it. I'm tired of it too.
It's not that I'm tired of it, but I already jumped on board to the 2018 IGCC 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And have been ahead. And I know it's a little easier because Gaithersburg is a lot smaller than Montgomery County, but I like to stay on top of everything. And when I first heard about all this coming out, one of my first questions was, well, did you talk to the code officials? Because it's great to have all your energy stuff, but in order to make the owners kind of do a lot of that, we can enforce it and force it by having the codes do that and help you all out with getting to those standards as well.
Yeah, I am totally in agreement with that. So yeah, we can put on our to-do list to, we're in good, we have good connections with the county code officials. I would say that less so with the local jurisdictions, the city jurisdictions. We have been reaching out to the economic development and the environmental commissions for both Rockville and Gaithersburg.
Yep.
But it sounds like we have another group of stakeholders to reach out to make sure that there's some coordination there. And I think that that's a good message to take back to our own permitting services. I think that they've done some better effort with engagement. There's still room for improvement.
Well, continue to keep up the good work. This is all very impressive. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And Rob, we'll reach out to you after this to see how we can do some better coordination.
No problem. Everyone's got my contact info. So.
I think I have it from Deb, like somewhere in my email.
You will. Okay.
I'd like to jump on that if I could. Lindsay, how much is Montgomery County coordinating with other counties throughout the state? You know, there's Eastern Shore has a bigger threat of flooding, let's just say, and we're talking, the AIA Maryland is talking to the state legislators about codes, and it sounds like just from Rob's comment that that's maybe one of the challenges is all getting everybody in the room together.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity at the state level to have codes come along a little bit further so there's more uniformity, just because we all know that Gaithersburg, Rockville, and Montgomery County codes usually exceed what the state is putting out as the base. You know, you can go higher than, but you can't backslide from what the state puts out. You know, in Rockville, Gaithersburg, and Montgomery County, we all have some form of the International Green Construction Code, but we all have different ones. We currently have 2012, Rockville is 2015, Gaithersburg, of course, leading the way with the first 2018. We're coming back with another pass. But then there's local amendments done to them as well. You know, the IGCC isn't an off-the-shelf type of thing. And then you have different, like we have WSSC that would enforce Chapter 6 of the IGCC and the IPC. And trying to get them to come along in coordination with Montgomery County has been a challenge, although one that they're open to working on. There's definitely some improvement that needs to be made there. And when we started to do the 2018 IGCC, a lot of that came to light. So yeah, there's definitely more interest in figuring out what's happening at the state level. I would say that the green building program in Montgomery County has a fresh start. So there's some more work to be done there. And in terms of bringing other counties along, we do work with the Maryland Association with Counties, especially when we're doing work at the General Assembly to try to make sure that Montgomery County isn't going it alone. We always look for additional partners to make sure that if we're talking about climate, we're moving others along with us. We're not necessarily going out on our own and striking out. So it's definitely a good point that state level coordination is something that definitely needs to happen. We're actually working, I would say in the next few months, we just had a meeting yesterday about planning our state legislation for climate of what we're going to do as a county. And we need to, once we figure that out, then we need to find partners. So it's definitely a good point to make.
Well, I know there's in some work within the Maryland legislation, there's a grant multiplier. I'm not quite sure. I'd have to look that up, but I know that if you put forward a certain amount of money, it can be accelerated. I just had a call the other day, so I can get back to you with what that is.
That'd be great. I haven't heard of that before.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Also, the EU is making a major effort to bring the example of what they've accomplished there to US cities. I think they're worried that they're on the same planet as us, and they want us to go a little faster. Brussels, of course, has a passive house standard, and the Belgian embassy here in DC is in process of bringing the lessons learned there, first in an exhibit, I think at the Building Museum, but also that would be a place to look, because I think there's maybe some connection to federal funding then as well.
Yeah, we're definitely keeping an eye on that federal funding opportunities with the American Jobs Act. And I'm very keen on seeing if there's a way, there's a lot in there about improving affordable housing. And we talked about that kind of more direct assistance to under-resourced sectors. And we'd really like to get our hands on some of those funds so we can implement a program where some building owners, they're not going to navigate all the programs that are out there. They kind of just want to turn the keys over and say, you just make me compliant, to do more of a energy as a service type model for compliance, and have another entity partnering with the county to make that happen. But of course, all these things take money. And you had mentioned passive house. I would love to come back with this group and talk more about the new energy efficient building incentive program that was a bunch of stakeholders, including some on this call, were involved in back in 2018 and 2019. We developed a two-tiered tax incentive model. Passive house is one of those building certifications that are incentivized with this program. But of course, you need to have your energy model with a certain percentage reduction beyond code in order to access that as a tax incentive. We have some emergency legislation. This was Bill 1020 back in September 2020 that was passed. And we need to make a couple fixes. So there's some legislation that's happening. Once that legislation it's emergency legislation, it should move faster. It's just some technical details that need to get worked out. Once that's through, then we can start making the forms, and then we can talk more openly so people can actually get their hands around what we're promoting and can actually apply for it. So that is coming. That program will open up January 1st, 2022. There's an existing buildings program now that if you have an improved Energy Star score from a 12-month baseline to a 12-month improvement, you can document how much your Energy Star score has changed in the current realm of the CBEX upgrade to Energy Star. So your baseline can't be older than August of 2018 when they changed. I think it was August 26th, 2018 when they made that change. But if you have 2 years worth of a baseline and an improvement, you can get a tax incentive for that, and then layer on top of that either LEED, Gold, or Platinum, or BREEAM in use, and the 2 highest levels for BREEAM in use. So those are the 2 building certifications that are incentivized with the existing building program. And then the new building program has additional certifications like Passive House, Living Building Challenge, a couple others.
Is WELL or Fitwell come onto the scene?
Not yet. I think that we, in our stakeholder group, we didn't have a strong advocate for it. But I think that it's something worth considering, especially in light of COVID and returning back to the workplace. I think that there's a potential that someone could argue or make a change to the legislation that could be an allowable certification, but right now it is not on the approved list.
Right.
I have a question, if I may. So this is coming from the perspective of the residential. In that initial slide you had, the pie chart, commercial sector was 26% and residential was 24%. So it's still a big, in fact, I wouldn't have thought that it was actually that those 2 things were that close, I guess, in energy use. What are there plans for dealing with this? You know, and in the area that we live, residential is largely a retrofit discussion. So what, is there anything being talked about? Anything?
There's a lot being talked about. There are a number of different actions in the climate action plan that address existing residential. And I would say that in terms of residential, the main focus has been on electrification and providing either incentives or later on requirements that existing homes retrofit to be fully electrified. I would say that in the climate action plan, that's the primary focus, assuming that the grid is going to get cleaner over time. There was an effort back in 2018 to revamp the residential tax credit. Right now, for residential retrofits, you can get up to $250 per year for energy efficiency upgrades. And I know that dollar amount does not motivate people to have, it doesn't. But if you, in the last 12 months, have gotten a programmable thermostat, if you have done window replacements, insulation additions, I think fans and storm doors are also included. There's a kind of a weird list, but basically if you can make the case in your home that you have done an upgrade that has reducing energy, you can get a $250 per year per household tax credit. Again, not a huge motivator, but you have to submit your receipt and it's a whole process. I got it for my windows. These are new windows behind me. But the windows are real expensive and the $250 is not a motivator. So we did an effort to look at what a new tax credit could look like, both for new construction and for existing retrofits, because we do have production builders and custom builders that want to offer greener homes for their clients. Yeah. And using the available certifications to do that. I will say that it was a bandwidth issue. I was running both work groups. It was too much, and commercial was moving faster along, and I spent more time on that. Unfortunately, the residential stuff just kind of fell flat. But that was just an effort of me not being me just being one person. Yeah. So yeah, there's effort to do that. There was also, I think the program structure that we eventually came up with was piggybacking off of the Empower Maryland program. And unfortunately that program, well, I guess fortunately, frankly, that program is facing some changes potentially, and it's hard to piggyback off of a program that's kind of in flux. So I think that we need to revive that work group, include more folks, and figure out what, based on what's informed in our climate action plan, what a new incentive or requirement would look like. I will also say for residential, there are some upgrades that are being worked on within DPS about enhancing the 2021 IECC and using that back in 2018 or 2019, the county executive said he wanted to mandate solar for all new construction. And then we said, some houses are built in the shade. That's not going to work. So we came up with this kind of choose your own adventure, either make your home more energy efficient, or you could add on-site solar or a combination of both to achieve a certain ERI. And so we're working on implementing that into the 2021 code.
Okay. This particular membership, AIAPV, is made up very largely of smaller scale practitioners who would love to chat with you about that. When you do have bandwidth, or anyone else has bandwidth to take that, we're open to helping through those conversations.
Awesome. I can't wait.
Me too.
We just need the climate action plan to be done. Then we'll have more bandwidth. And then, of course, we're going to be staffing up our team if BEPS is passed and council agrees with our fiscal impact statement. We, of course, will have more benchmarking work to do. We'll have more building performance work to do. Right now, Team Energy you're looking at 50% of it. We're a small group. So we want to do a lot, and we look like we do a lot more than the people we have on staff. But yeah, we, BEPS, of course, will tackle existing commercial, and then existing residential will come soon after.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
looking forward to engaging with this group on that.
Good, thank you. We're just about at the hour. Does anyone have any other questions? Anything that it's just burning a hole that they need to address?
Just, will this recording be available?
Yes, it will. We will post it on our YouTube channel.
Okay, good. All right.
And we'll send these slides out after, as our contact info
Okay.
and BEPS website.
Lindsay, I guess I have a real quick question on the under-resourced groups. And you mentioned that affordable housing and the nonprofits are really the primary folks there. Do you have a specific task force working on that, or what is there a process for attempting to reach some sort of understanding and accommodation, livable framework for them?
Right now, it's our team figuring out what available programs are out there and people who are willing to help. There's some good work being done in DC around affordable housing and how affordable housing is interacting with the building energy performance standard there. So we are looking to piggyback off of some of that group, the work that they're doing. And the Building Advisory Board does have one sector dedicated to affordable housing versus market rate. So both sectors are covered. We want someone at the table, especially in the advisory board, who can speak to the experience of affordable housing and the challenges that they may face that market rate housing might not. So I would say the Building Advisory Board is where we're planning on harnessing that effort, because that group will also be looking to the finalizing the regulations that are put forward. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, there's more learning that we need to do. And benchmarking, multifamily properties will be benchmarking for the first time with this amendment that's moving forward. So our contacts in the multifamily space are not as strong as we need them to be. So there's definitely more learning that our team needs to do.
Thanks.
Good to know. Okay. Hey, Lindsay, thank you so much for that presentation. Emily, thank you for all of your support on this and all of these. Sue, are we capturing also, do we capture the comments? Emily's left us a lot of great links to connect to. So anyway, I'll give everyone one more minute if they want to take any of those links that Emily's put in here. But thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for giving us this opportunity to engage with you, and let's keep doing it.
Great, thank you. So
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add an administrative point there. So if you're not able to capture the links, send me an email and let me know what you want, because we do get a printout of everything in the chat so I can share.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Sue.
Yep.
Okay, any final thought from you, Lindsay or Emily?
I would just say beyond a thank you for hosting us today. Invite us back anytime, especially if we have something to share. We'll be in contact with Sue and Deborah about what's going on and if there's other ways to engage. But I would say stay tuned on the public hearing. And if this group is interested in participating in that, we would welcome your input, positive and negative. If you have constructive criticism, we would love to hear it. And we encourage folks to actually read the legislation. It's a lot to unpack. It's about 13 pages of a bill. So, but worth the read. But just want to reiterate our thanks for letting us share an hour with you.
Great. Okay, everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.
All right,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
take some time off.
Yeah.